Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. Today I am sharing a project that I had introduced back in May, I think it was, because this album was supposed to be a gift kind of for Mother's and Father's Day, but because it was for my parents and their 50th wedding anniversary is this year, I decided to turn this into an anniversary present instead, and it would give myself time to work on it, only I didn't do that. I spent the last 4 days kind of crash finishing this album. So I will link you up to the intro to this album. Now, I didn't design the core of the album. It was from a Crop and Create class that I took in the spring event. All right, so I started off the intro of this with my husband and I when we were dating, getting married, and then kind of getting pregnant with our first baby. And I guess I should say that I did not have the best relationship with my parents for a long time. In fact, I didn't speak with them for about 12 years. And so we've been back in touch for quite a while now. But as part of their 50th anniversary, I wanted to kind of recap a lot of things that they missed in my life. And so that's what this album is all about. So with the kind of mushy stuff and the hard stuff out of the way, let's keep going. I do want to say I'm going to be using my little bin of privacy markers here because my son does not like to be on social media of any kind. So to respect his privacy, I will be keeping my little happy faces nearby, and I will pause in between turning pages to make sure I haven't missed something. So I feel like I need a little ding sound from those old-fashioned storybooks that had the audio recording to go with it. So if I can find a ding sound, insert here. All right, despite him being super little in this album, I have covered up his face. Now, this album is kind of different because it has these half pages in here, and honestly, I don't like these because I find it confusing that there's this next page here, and most people are going to want to flip from here instead of flipping from here. I did consider putting little tabs on here to help make that more obvious, but I was just getting tired by the end and I decided to skip that step. Nope, there are a few little tags and pull-out bits here. When I was doing each layout, because I only had this many pages to work with, because it was an album set up for a class, I didn't have extra pages to keep going. So I had to compact 2 years down to this is the size of one spread. And it's a lot to fit on, a lot of time to fit on one spread. I was able to choose 3 to 4 pictures from each year of life to continue this documentation process. So in the beginning, I chose kind of key milestone moments like holidays. With Halloween, we have birthday, and then once I got those key milestone moments in there, birth, and then I would fill in with a few other, cute pictures. A lot of the core bones of the album already had a title card, some decorative cards, and these little pockets with some journaling spots already set up in the core album. And again, I can link you up to that. So most of these pieces were already set up. I did, in a few instances, take out some of these pieces to add more photos. All right, let's turn the page. All right, this is the next 2-year spread. And again, we're talking about from here to here. And like I said before, I did find this style of spread confusing. What the instructor tried to do was to keep each spread with a core color scheme. So if you can tell, this core color scheme had pink, and this is actually a navy blue. It's probably looking black on camera. And then a couple pops of yellow were part of the core color scheme. The previous page, as you can tell from some of these, were blue and yellow, and I don't quite remember. So this yellow color became a pop of color on the next page. So that's the core. Some of the pages, oh, that is on screen, okay. Some of the pages had these tip-ups. I'm going to put my thumb over a photo here. And so you could create more tip-ups to add to other pages in the album if you wanted to add more photos for a project like this. It makes a great gift for sure. You could also do something like this as a gift for somebody having a new baby. This would be a really fun way, and then you wouldn't necessarily set it up with 2 years, but you could set up each course spread to document a year of baby's life. So that is that on tip outs. Let's see, anything else I want to talk about on this page? We'll probably go faster as I move along here. All right, here is the next page on my spread. I did just grab a sheet of cardstock to cover up the distractingness of the next spread. And this may lead to a permanent solution that I'll do off camera, is if I can somehow cut a sheet of pattern paper and be able to attach it somehow without covering up any of the existing stuff on this spread. For now, it is what it is. At any rate, other things to tell you about this spread. So these were the title cards that were included with the class. Now, the title cards I covered up because they had words or icons that didn't really fit for my story, especially since I knew I was breaking my story down into these year groupings. So I created these cover-ups and the dates on my Cricut machine and made them all uniform and even so that I had a consistency as we move through the album. So if you have something along these lines, like journal cards that maybe you like the color of, but the words don't work, because this is a really pretty frame, go ahead and cut down other journal cards, and a lot of them are double-sided with patterns on each side, and see if you can cover up just the part that isn't working for you. The other thing about this spread is that I have these much, much smaller photos. I've got 3 of them to fit in the space of 2 medium photos or the space of 1 larger photo. So if you can print your photos smaller, go ahead and do that so you can squeeze more in onto a pocket spread. All right, here we are on the next page, and I just realized something that I didn't talk about the previous page. Hopefully I will remember to talk about that a little bit more when I get to another example of that. But here's the basic idea. I used a circle punch to punch out some elements from leftovers from making this album, and there were a lot of leftovers so that we could decorate and kind of zhuzh up other areas. Back to these circles. I punched out circles to highlight the dates on certain photos. Like these were both birthday photos, but this one doesn't really look like a birthday. So when I put them side by side and highlight the dates, it helps imply the message that these are both birthday photos. And that is mirrored over here with my son and his birthday photos. So the whole reading of the album has a little bit of mental work to do in the process of discovery of all of these story parts. There was one more lift-a-flap here, but I'm going to leave that one closed because that is a fairly personal story that I don't want to share on the internet. Let's see. So I hope I remember more about these punches, and then we can go ahead and move on to the next page. All right, here we are on the next spread. Using smaller photos can leave more room for journaling and telling the actual stories. I found as I was working through the album, I would pick some key photos that led to a longer story. So like my kids all did gymnastics. So I picked one key photo of one of my kids, not all of them, at the beginning stage of gymnastics, and we'll get to that. And then later in the album, I would have a callback to the previous place where I started the story so that the story can flow along. So I really like the idea of elongating stories like this when you're spanning a lot of years, picking photos that could lead into more info about the background behind the photos was important to me when putting this album together. All right, and again, using more smaller photos to fit more on there, finding commonalities between photos. So I had a picture of my daughter cooking and a picture of my son cooking. So putting those side by side was a technique that I used for this album. All right, here we are on the next page, and I actually have a few things to say about that. One is that these were the other little circles that I added to my layouts. I love, love, love numbered journaling. So I would number a photo with a punch, and I just use a date stamp to stamp a single number onto each photo. And then in my journaling card, which is an interactive piece that you can pull out, I'm going to cover up some of it because I don't want to share all the details. This one was already numbered, so I knew I could limit my photos to choosing 6 to tell the story about. So you'll notice that this photo does not have a number on it because it's pretty clearly a Halloween picture. There wasn't really much else to say about this photo besides noting that my son always liked to do weird pumpkins. So this kind of just highlights his personality a little bit without going into too much detail. Another thing that I did not shy away from was telling harder stories. So this is a photo of my youngest daughter having a typical toddler tantrum. And so when she had a tantrum as a toddler, she was a very easy baby and really a pretty easy kid, but she would have tantrums. And she would cry so hard that she would pass out. So that was a very important part of her story at this age and my story at this age. Luckily, as a parent, I already knew that could happen, although my other kids never did anything like that. I knew it was a thing. I knew it could happen. And so when it happened the first time, I wasn't worried or freaked out or anything. So don't shy away from telling the harder parts of life. I think it's a little bit dishonest to remove yourself from the things that you struggle with because we all have struggles. And if we don't talk about them, we feel like we're the only ones who are feeling challenged. And I think it really does a huge disservice to society in general. So please include the hard stories in your albums. Another hard story is that the same daughter used to twist her hair and suck her thumb at the same time, and she would rip her hair out until she went bald. And one time it got so bad, I had to try and cut her hair the best I could to even it out. Yes, you can kind of see that on screen. Okay, so another little bit of a hard story there. Do I have something in this lift a flap? Oh, yes. Okay, so this lift a flap is what I was talking about with that gymnastic story. And this was a terrible photo. So here's some photo tips for you. The parents always sat in this balcony way up high in the gym. And so having a terrible phone camera in 2009 meant my photos were pretty bad of their gymnastic days. So what I did was a little editing magic to shade out all of the distraction, highlight what I wanted to show of my kid in this photo without permanently getting rid of all of the context of the photo. So you can obviously tell there's a bunch of kids, there's gymnastics going on, but it really helps highlight what is happening. So if you have the ability to do some little photo editing magic, there's so many apps out there these days that I just don't know what is and isn't possible in like app-based editors because I do use Photoshop. But there's got to be ways to do this. I just don't know what they are. So I wish I had better info on that for you. At any rate, this gymnastics story will come back as we move through the album. All right, I think that is it for this page, so let's move on. All right, here is the next batch of 2 years of our life. There's not a lot that I think I want to say about this one besides just reiterating that sometimes these pre-designed cards didn't work, in which case I would cut up another card and cover things up. If it fit okay, then it was fine. I would just leave it. But sometimes I would even eliminate that section altogether and just add more photos. That can be a little tricky because the designer who created this class and this album knows that having these spaces in your album is resting space to help you move through the story. So trying to eliminate all those and just shoving in extra photos is tempting, but it makes it harder to move through the story, as a presentation, as a gift. So there's always a balance there. One of the ways that I did find to add more stuff was to use the back sides of some of these elements. So we had the tip-ups, but we also, on this album, also included some tags that I could add stuff to the back side, like lots more to the story. What I didn't mention about the previous spread is that there was one picture of my son where he had his hand over his face. And that's part of his story too, because at that age, he kind of started avoiding his picture being taken because he wasn't interested in a lot of that anymore. So moving forward in the album, you'll see him less often because there's not as many pictures, or you'll see things like the side or back of his head because there's not as many pictures. So instead of trying to explain it away or force him to do something that he doesn't want to do, I make that part of the story. And pardon me for a second. And so going back to this page, you can see I made a little note. The camera avoidance begins. So that is a clue that he's going to be less available in these photos. Sometimes I would come across photos that reminded me of things that my kids would do year after year after year. For example, my youngest loved piñatas for many years, and every year for her birthday, she would have a piñata. So instead of putting a picture of every single birthday that had a piñata, I chose a cute picture from one of the years and then made it a journaling point to tell that longer, bigger story. So that is one of those tips that I'm trying to reiterate, that you don't have to put every single photo in these albums. Pick a key photo that tells a bigger story and then make note of what that story is and what it looks like. Speaking of bigger stories, I have one photo of my daughter with her two best friends at this age. They met when they were 4 and 5 years old, and now they're 20 and 21 years old, and they are still friends. So this, even though it's not a great photo, this is very much a big story. So while I put a small photo here, the words and the longer story matter the most. And then I will have another callback to this photo later on as my youngest daughter also gets incorporated into this group of friends and it becomes a bigger story. So choosing those key photos that really dive deeper into what life is was key to putting together this album. Pointing out really interesting personality quirks with little notes here and then doing a callback. So this talks about how my youngest loves to get her hands onto everything. She would build crazy constructions and contraptions, and we'd go to the library and do art and activities and crafts. And even home improvement projects, she was right in the middle of everything. So we started calling her our little maker. That is a personality trait that starts developing that continues through this album and through this story. So we'll get to that a little bit more in future pages. All right, here we are on another page. I have more gymnastics style photos here, and the journaling spot leads us into doing that callback to the previous gymnastics photo. So this is where some of that comes back. I do have another photo that starts developing those personality traits that you'll see later in life and how they're continuing to this day. So kind of the same things that I've been talking about with developing your story and keeping it going. This one was a funny little kind of coincidence. When I was looking through all these photos, my middle kid had a lot of dental needs when she was younger. And so she had braces from the time she was 9 until the time she was 13, I think, 12 or 13. So she had a lot of years. And then as soon as she got out of that, she got diagnosed with scoliosis and had to go into a back brace. So putting these two photos side by side gives me a perspective on her body and her story that I might not otherwise have. So find those key moments that really expand on your story and tell it even bigger than it otherwise would have been if you told each piece individually. Not too much to say about this page. I definitely, did capture some of those bigger milestones like turning 18. Here is another photo of my daughter in the middle of drilling and screwing things together. So that's another one of those callbacks that I've been talking about. I did really try to include bigger family photos as well, not only of like all of the kids in one photo, but parents in the photo too, because we are definitely part of this whole story. None of this would be happening without the parents. So I think we often forget to include ourselves and our spouses in these photos. And it's actually easier to include your spouse because you're probably the one behind the camera. But do take a step back every once in a while and either do a group selfie, even if it's a bad one. At least you've got you in there. Like I said, more big events like a total solar eclipse that happened. My daughter started driving, so getting those key milestone moments in there is important too. But you don't need every single birthday. If you catch a key birthday here and there, then you've got your story bases covered. All right, here is the layout that covers 2019 and then 2020, and we all know what happened in 2020. So part of what I appreciated about doing a project like this, and in fact, I appreciated it so much that I considered doing an entirely second album, changing the page style, for myself, and picking up on some of these larger story pieces. Like in 2019, we had no idea that 2020 was going to be so dang different. That is a larger piece of this story that leads to, telling about surprise and unexpected things and how life had changed. So I'll be honest, when I thought that I might do a second album, I realized that when my parents are gone, my brother and I are going to go through their stuff, and this will probably be in there. My mom is very sentimental and she saves a lot of things, so I don't think she'll get rid of this. And I might get it back someday. And that's kind of, something hard to think about, but something joyful to think about at the same time, because, this book is going to have its own story of its own journey to someone else who gets a different perspective from it. And then it'll come back to me and I can add more to it. So there's a lot of sentimentality here. Did I get that word right? Well, let's go back to this layout and thinking about 2020. So when I did my journaling, I definitely wrote it from a current knowledgeable perspective, saying how naive we were in 2019 about what life could do to us, and then talking about what it did and what it changed and what we missed out on. My middle kid lost her second half of her senior year of high school. So capturing, like I said, don't shy away from the hard things. And of course, none of us could shy away from the hardness of 2020. But also keeping in mind, this card said small steps every day. But that card in particular, I hung on to because I knew 2020 would be in this album, and I knew that that card was going to be part of the story. And speaking of knowing that part of the story, I saved these pieces as well, which says Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And this designs a sense of repetition visually to a story of a time in our lives that felt very monotonous and repetitious. And you'll see this come up again in 2021 when we turn the page. All right, here we are in 2021 and 2022. And guess what? My son is nowhere to be seen. Remember I said that he was camera shy? Well, he was more than camera shy because of COVID. And so he is nowhere to be seen on these layouts. And that is part of real life. And I do incorporate that into my story throughout the album as we go. So don't shy away from those hard things. It's very hard for me that he isn't here, but I need to respect who he is. What else can I say about that? Here is that repetition of those days of the week, because while we all thought 2021 would be a bit different, it didn't turn out that way for us, and it didn't turn out that way in a lot of places. I did try to highlight some things within the abnormality that felt like we were moving forward, but also doing callbacks to things like continued masking, continued no birthday gatherings. So trying to find the balance between the hard stuff and the stuff that we can appreciate, it becomes a big theme of these last few years. Here we are in 2023, and I just realized I didn't put that date anywhere on here. So because this was supposed to be like a closing page to the album, this story doesn't have an end because it's our lives and it's going to keep going. And I do make a reference here in the journaling about where will we be next? And I think I specifically say, I don't know what the next 26 pages of life will look like. So that's my quote right there in this journaling. And this sticker in particular from the kit says, little by little, a little becomes a lot. And that is true of life. You start off dating somebody and getting married and having a baby, and then you end up 25 plus years later, and you have a whole life. You have a whole life full of ups and downs and pros and cons. Just capture all the parts of life because they all matter. All right, before I get all mushy again, I will wrap this up. I will say thank you so much for watching. I really do hope you got something helpful out of hearing my rambling thought process on why I did what I did with this album. If you have suggestions, tips, ideas, things that work for you, do leave a comment so that we can all read them and just learn more about this style of scrapbooking. All right, that is it for this time. Until next time, I hope you have an artful day.